Dr. Mikhail Shulman. I'm joining you again, and I'm glad that you're joining me for class number 4 in our series on the secrets of Noah's Ark. The last class, we were in the midst of discussing the immense size of the ark, and we asked this question. The ark had such a huge capacity for carrying animals and the payload. Was the ark filled to its maximum capacity or something less than that? And if it would be filled to its maximum capacity, would it still remain seaworthy? Because we know that the custom of the seagoing merchants in the earlier days was that they're going on a long journey. They have a lot of cargo to carry, not knowing what the conditions might be on the seas. They would overload their ships, and if everything went well, if it was a calm ride, they arrived fine. But if the weather got stormy, what would they do? Well, look into the Hebrew Bible in the story of Jonah. When Jonah entered the ship and they set sail from Tarshish, so the sea was stirred up by great waves, and the boat was in danger of capsizing, and they started throwing the cargo overboard to try and lighten the ship, because it had been overloaded and it would be unstable if it was too heavy. So this is a difference between the works of human beings and the things that are done for the sake of God. And as I had explained last time, there's a lesson that we can compare this to, which was the story of the building of the tabernacle, the portable temple, which the Israelites built in the wilderness at Mount Sinai, in which they transported with them during the 40 years that they had to wander through the wilderness. So it describes that when the tabernacle was dedicated, just before the first Passover, at the end of the first year after they had left Egypt, that the 12 princes of the 12 tribes of Israel, they brought a dedication offering. And they were inspired, divinely so, to bring a gift for the use of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle. And what was this special gift that the 12 tremendously wealthy princes brought? They got together in partnership and they brought 6 wagons and 12 oxen. The purpose being that on 2 of the wagons they would carry all the heavy curtains, which were basically hides mostly, and also spun and embroidered tapestries, which were huge and very, very heavy. So those were loaded onto 2 wagons, and all of the tall and heavy beams of the walls of the tabernacle, over which the curtains were spread, were loaded onto 4 wagons. And it was just enough space and strength of the oxen to be able to transport all of those parts of the Mishkan. The lesson being that when you're serving God, you have to use all of your available resources, all of your abilities that you have in the service of God. So you could expect that likewise the ark would be loaded to its full capacity with everything that was going to be in there, all the animals, all the birds, the allowance for the amount of food they would need, the waste that would be generated, and still be seaworthy. And this is what the analysis showed, that we had described, the engineering analysis that was done with the computer simulations, that calculating the entire capacity of the ark and how, if it was fully loaded in, it was still within the and just within the guidelines for being seaworthy. And this work was actually the subject of a television program produced by the Discovery Channel in 2004. And this is available. We're going to take that section of the program, which was on this analysis of Noah's Ark that I've been describing, and we're going to make it available to you from the Noahide Academy website. Now, the structure of the ark was 3 levels. The bottom level for the waist, the middle level, which Rashi explains according to Midrash, was for the animals, and the top level, which was for the people. Now, with the animals being on the middle level, as we said that considering an average size, average weight for the animals, that the ark could sustain that. But that's only if the animals were evenly distributed through that middle floor of the ark, because if all the animals at one time decided to press forward to one end, the balance would be upset and the ark would just probably tip over. So the animals had to be confined somewhat in some type of stalls, and if you consider perhaps that the width of the ark would be divided into 4 long rows of stalls, and you would have, let's say, 50 columns of compartments within the little over 600 feet length, I think 627 feet length, and about 104 foot width. What you would come up with is about 200 stalls, with one dimension being about 12 feet and the other dimension being about 24 feet. And multiple species that were compatible with living with each other could be put into the same stalls. So that gives you kind of an idea of the layout of the ark. Now, the ark itself, it was not just self-contained, because it was, as we know, it was sealed on the outside, it was sealed on the inside. It was also a self-sustaining environment. Now, how could this be self-sustaining for an entire year? And even a bigger question that comes along with this is, what was the purpose of the commandment that God gave that the middle level would be for the creatures and the top level would be for the humans, which is very, very hard to explain. Why all the extra space necessary for 8 people? Noah and his wife and his sons and their 4 wives. So the analysis by Dr. Joseph Silver looks at this and says that one very probable explanation would take into account that Noah was an expert farmer in his time, brought a great amount of new farming technology to mankind, that almost the entire top level of the floor of the ark could have been planted with a layer of soil, and we know that Noah brought with him saplings and shoots of all different types of plants, and there could actually have been a planting of crops there in the ark to sustain the creatures. So if you analyze that and say for about a cubic foot of very rich, dense soil is around 127 pounds. And about 6 inches is what's needed to root plants in that soil. So if the great majority of that level of the ark was actually a field for growing plants, you would end up with about 32,000 cubic feet of soil and around 4 million pounds for that soil, and still being within the design criteria for the ark to be seaworthy. And the question is, even if Noah had loaded the ark with food initially, and then had the crops planted and almost ready to harvest, and could have done another planting, would that still have been sufficient to provide enough food for the animals? Remember that, as we said, and according to what would be required, and according to the Midrash, for all the animals to live together in harmony on the ark, and to be able to sustain them on vegetation. So there had to be an environment there that was rather miraculous, but not something that we can't imagine, because the conditions of the Messianic era are well described to us in the Torah sources, and we know that the conditions inside Noah's Ark were actually a microcosm of what would be in the future in the Messianic era, when you have the wolf dwelling with the lamb, and as it says, the lion eating hay like the ox. So in the Talmud, it does describe in Tractate Sanhedrin what the conditions are going to be like in the Messianic era, and it goes into length about what the conditions will be for the plants and the crops. It would be a tremendous increase over what we have now, but not something new that never happened before, because the sources also describe how things were in the Garden of Eden, initially, the beginning of creation, how things were in the land of Canaan, in the Holy Land, before the Israelites came in to inherit the land after they came out from Egypt in the Exodus. And in all these three cases, the conditions were the same. That the fruits and the crops that were produced were much more abundant and much larger than what we know now. For example, it says that the kernels of wheat were the size of a kidney, and the individual grapes were like the size of a barrel. And the fact that you had that in the Garden of Eden, and the land of Israel itself being the Holy Land, this was the condition that God prepared there for the Israelites. And unfortunately, when they did come in and inherit the land, they initially had that great blessing, but they had a falling down in their spiritual level, and that bounty was lost from the earth. But it will return again in the Messianic era, and not only in the land of Israel, but it says that in the times of the Messiah, that the holiness of the land of Israel will spread out over the entire world. And so this is what the conditions will be in the future, in the Messianic era, and in the world to come, that the abundance from the great growth of the crops will be so much that we will have no problems feeding the entire world population, no matter how large it will grow. Now, another question that people might ask is, okay, the ark contained a great number of animals. We looked at our analysis, and we said that probably 36,000 creatures on the ark would be easily sustainable, and those being just among the animals themselves, and you have the birds. But still, if you have that starting population, would that be able to produce the diversity of species that we have in the world today? So what I'd like to do is point out to you one of the books that we recommend, which is this tremendous special book called Not by Chance, by Dr. Lee Spetner. And he goes into a very scientific but understandable analysis of the neo-Darwinian theory of evolution. And he shows very clearly that it is totally inconsistent with any scientific expectation of being possible. The statistical possibilities and actually the observations of what you would have based on a random evolution theory doesn't exist in the world. However, he does present a non-random evolutionary theory, which is consistent with everything that we see, and it's also consistent with Torah sources. And in fact, towards the back, he brings out that from the Talmud and the Midrash, and particularly the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, that in the late 1700s, early 1800s, there was a great rabbi named Rabbi David Luria, who did a very thorough analysis of the Midrashim, particularly from Rabbi Eliezer, on the animals that spread out from the Garden of Eden and also out from the Ark of Noah, and what he derived based on the sources that there were very likely 365 species of animals and 365 species of birds, which were initially provided by God, and when they spread out over the world, so their characteristics and their species differentiations changed based on their environments and the food that they were eating, and so on. And I would definitely encourage you to take a look at that. And it's actually a commentary that's been published here in Israel in the last few decades. And the last point I'd like to make while I'm wrapping up the class for today is that in the chapter 7 of Genesis, when it describes how the ark was completed and the animals from their own divine inspiration, inspired by God, came to the ark, it says that on this very day, meaning when God had told Noah 7 days earlier that the flood would begin, so that day came. It says on this very day, the flood waters were on the earth, and Noah and all the animals entered the ark, and God shut them in with the closing the door on the side of the ark and sealing it. So this interesting expression. Why does it say on this very day? Because we know it was on that day. It turns out that there are only 3 places in the entire 5 books of Moses where it uses that expression. One is there by the story of Noah. Another one is the story of when the Israelites went out from Egypt on the day of the Passover, after the night of the plague of the firstborn. And it says that on this very day the Israelites went out. And the third time it says that is at the very end of the 5 books of Moses, in the book of Deuteronomy, when it came time for Moses to pass away. And he was to ascend up to the Mount Nebo, and there he would die, and that was his 120th birthday. And the Torah says, on this very day, Moses went up onto the mountain. So what is the similarity between all those 3 occurrences? So at the last one that I mentioned, at the death of Moses, Rashi gives the explanation there. He says that in each one of those cases, that the people of the generation were vowing that they would stop the event from happening. They swore that by this or by that, we are not going to let it happen. So in the time of Noah, God had said clearly when the flood is going to start, and the people of the generation were swearing that by this and by that, we will surround the ark, we will not let Noah go in, we will even take axes and hammers and will destroy the ark. So what did God do? God surrounded the ark with fierce animals, lions and bears, and anyone who tried to go and harm the ark or stop any of the animals or Noah's family from going in were killed by the ferocious animals. At the time of the Exodus, God had told the Israelites when they would be going out. They knew that it was going to be on the 15th of Nisan. That was the 400th birthday of Isaac, and that was the prophecy of the 400 years exactly. And the people of Egypt were saying, by this and by that, we will stop the Israelites from going out, and we will even kill anyone who tries to go. And so God said, we'll see who will be the successful one here. God will take the Israelites out in the very middle of the day, in broad daylight, and no one will be able to stop them. And this is what happened, because the plague of the firstborn happened, and the Egyptians were totally overcome with fright and with the necessity of dealing with all the people at that time who had died. And finally, in the days of Moses, on a more positive aspect, the Israelites at that time were totally dedicated to Moses as their spiritual leader. He had led them for 40 years in the desert, and all of their needs had been provided through him. He struck the rock, and the water came out. They ran out of food, and the manna came down from heaven, and the clouds of glory followed them and protected them through all the 40 years. And he taught them Torah. That was the main connection they had to Moses. And they said that such a leader that we will love so much, we will not let him go up on the mountain, and we will not let him pass away. And God said, that's admirable that you have that dedication to your leader, but the time has come for him to leave. And in one step, Moses covered the entire distance, and there was nothing that anyone could do to stop him. So this leaves us with a very important lesson that we need to be accepting of God's decrees, and we need to always bless God for the good that we receive, the blessings, as well as the things that we perceive as negative. That we have to bless God for those as well, because that is His divine intention, and everything is for the good, ultimately, or even sooner if we can see the divine providence in it. Thank you very much.